Good afternoon. Hi, everyone. I find it nice to do a little walk and talk. I'm thinking about my father, who I also inherited his propensity for motion sickness or getting easily, nauseous. So if the shaky camera is problematic, well, you'll let me know. But I posted, and I think Amy Erickson, hi Amy, commented on Instagram. It's Sunday afternoon. I'm actually walking for my church job. So a while back, maybe about a year and a half ago, I posted sort of a day in the life. And one of the things that I still do is my church job on East 20th and 2nd. And if you want, you can pull out a map of Manhattan for kicks. But basically, I've also started doing my another job in the Bronx at a Catholic church just due east from where I live. I live in Washington Heights at 181st. And because my church job downtown doesn't start till 1 in the afternoon, which is late for church, of course, I can pick up other work. And on a Sunday morning, it's pretty, things are pretty quiet, as if things are pretty dead. So I picked up extra work. So I'm playing at a Catholic church in the Bronx, and then I rushed down to my church on the somewhat lower east side. Well, Midtown East, if you want, depending on what you think East 20th is. Anyway, I'm walking to a rehearsal for a reading tomorrow, and I post about these things and sometimes make hay about it. It just depends on a couple things. One, sometimes the projects fall through. I don't know, sometimes we lose funding or scheduling, or we lose an actor, or we lose a director, or the things are getting rewritten and they're not ready. But in this case, I was approached by a writer named Kim Powers. And Kim is not short for Kimberly, it's a guy. Kim is a two-time Emmy-winning writer with ABC News. There was talk of, I think, being involved with Diane Sawyer at one point. I haven't totally stalked his whole CV, but he's very impressive. And basically said to me, look, he said he was researching a book about Truman Capote when Truman Capote was writing in cold blood back in the 50s. Check my dates. But Truman Capote, who's now all the rage with the Swans on FX, and he's just such a personality. When he was writing in cold blood, he took Harper Lee from To Kill a Mockingbird, and went to see a drag show in the 50s in Kansas. And so, in Kansas, truly. And they went to go see a drag performer named Ray Bourbon. Bourbon as the drink, Ray, R-E-R-A-E. Ray, R-A-E, was originally R-A-Y, and simply changed his first name to maybe a more female identifying. And back in the 50s, I don't know how Ray would have identified, male, female, her, him, he, they. I'm not really sure about those pronouns, but Ray was a drag performer in the 50s and the 40s. Well, actually, all the way back. His story goes back to silent films at the turn of the century, and Ray was in some silent films with Rudolph Valentino. And so I'm getting ahead of myself. So it's a really fascinating story, and this is sort of the behind the scenes scoop of all this. Kim Powers is a writer who called me and said that he was doing research on his book about Truman Capote, and in that research discovered that Truman went to go see this drag performer. Now, I've never heard of Ray Bourbon. Ray Bourbon was in Wizard of Oz. Okay, there's your Freudian slip for the day. And went to go see Ray Bourbon, and Ray Bourbon was kind of doing their own thing later in life, doing these drag shows, and long story short, got accused of murder. Ray would collect stray dogs, and at one point his car broke down and he had to drop the dogs off at a vet in a small town in Texas while you're driving through. Anyway, really fascinating story. And maybe I'll post the link to a couple of the podcasts that I've heard about, like the true crime of it all, because it's unclear. It's unclear if Ray actually killed anyone or did anything that would have caused him to be in prison, but he ended up in prison where he called some of his best friends, like Mae West. Ray Bourbon and Mae West were around the same time, performing around the same time, and had like a friendship, a collegial friendship, and was calling for help, and no one would. Mae West doesn't, I don't think, really helps him. He ends up dying of cancer in prison sometime in the 70s. Now, the interesting thing I heard on these podcasts, because I get, this is the other great thing about some of the work I do, is that every show and every project kind of drops you into the world of, whether it's, think about like a Hamilton, you're dropping into the world of Hamilton I'm not involved with, but just to say that you can get so immersed in history or time periods, culture, language, costumes, setting, the lingo, everything. I love that. And so I want to educate myself as much as possible about the topics. So Ray is a drag performer well before RuPaul, well before any of the drag icons and characters we know today, but was absolutely a trailblazer. Now, the interesting thing for me as the music director, I get the call to come work on this show. And it's a one-person show with music from Ray Bourbon's acts. And again, I think I posted something about this where Ray kind of does this Noel Coward speak sing where there's kind of some lounge piano underneath it. What I love about this sort of music, and I've done some projects like this where the music ends up becoming, it's a punctuation, either a comment or really a button that lets your audience know. Hopefully you line it up with the performer telling a joke, saying a line, ending a phrase, and really hearing the cadence of the voice and the music assisting that, accompanying that. So I love that. So Ray was sort of lost to history, in part, as some of the podcasts pointed out to me, in part because as the AIDS epidemic hit in the late 70s, early 80s, well into the 80s, a lot of people died who knew Ray, who knew of Ray. And there were other things, other cultural events that took focus. And so I'm also curious, and this is where I can end this segment. Ray, some of his humor is dated. Some of the humor, as I heard on one of these podcasts about his life, their life, some of it was perceived to be racist or unkind to certain people. I think comedy is a difficult thing to judge if something's funny or not. Are you offended or not? And I think we're living very tenuous times, which is a whole other conversation, about making art, be it a comedy routine or a painting or a movie. How do we entertain? If it's still funny, if you're offended but it's still funny, but maybe it was the delivery, does that forgive the work? Does that forgive the moment? Anyway, that I think is maybe partly why Ray has also gone out of favor. However, everything I've run across of their material is pretty funny. It's still pretty fresh, pretty witty. So the industry reading, it's a sold out, I say private event. You have to RSVP, and we're in a small studio space where we will present this material for the first time. I'm actually walking to rehearsal right now, I think in the rain. We're doing this with Drew Droege. I have to ask how his last name is pronounced. And I love Drew's work. He's done a couple one-man shows of his own, Bold Colors and Bright Patterns, Happy Birthday Doug, both were hysterical and poignant. And I've just seen him a lot. He has a wonderful social media presence if you want a good laugh. Drew's an improv actor from LA. He was in Titanic in New York, and he is playing Ray, and I'm playing the pianist. It's so fun to work with someone who is quick on their feet, collaborative, easygoing. And last night I met him for the first time. We had Zoomed, we got on Zoom. I had made some recordings, which I posted one of them here on Patreon, and it's I don't want to say it's triage in the sense that we keep the patient alive, we just keep the show going, and it's a bit of guerrilla theater in that we're just hustling all the materials, just throwing it together, just saying yes and that classic improv sensibility of like, great, let's do that, great, good, move on, great, good. Because Drew flew in from LA for the weekend, and I had rehearsal all day yesterday for another thing that I'm doing. I'm just playing rehearsals for, and I had 2 church jobs, and now I'm heading to this. I love it. It's great. And there is a fortitude, a sense of the ability to just roll with it. But so this is one of the things I'm doing. But this project, as you can tell, I'm pretty excited about. Both the history is interesting. I think at the end of the play, which again, this is all the ink hasn't even dried. You know, the material's so fresh. But what I like is that feeling of attention must be paid. That here is somebody who is in the play in prison trying to recount their life. So we do a little retrospective, and that's kind of cool to set up the play with that conceit. But at the end of it, you recognize that there would be no, I don't think, RuPaul and the drag race world and all of these drag queens now. Ray was a trailblazer, and certainly a part of it, even if they're sort of lost to history. I think the culture was definitely moved forward. And by the way, with all the current affairs regarding trans rights and gay rights and the way in which we are viewing all of that right now, here's someone who had transitioned in the 50s, who went down to Mexico and had an operation, and was then doing this act where he was he was constantly getting arrested. He was getting arrested for impersonating a woman, and apparently later on, when he transitioned, he then got arrested for impersonating a man. So, you know, it does make me laugh to a certain extent how uptight, and it just all sounds so ridiculous, which for Ray was, he did nothing but laugh at that, which I also love. This sort of attitude of, you know, look how crazy this world is. So, okay. Question: how do you tell someone's story, especially a biopic? And I'm thinking about the Oscars tonight, thinking about some of the stories that have come out, which I love. That's a whole other episode. Do we only show the good parts? Do we show the bad parts? Like some of the things I was saying about Ray, as I've discovered, like, ooh, there's some of the, you know, the humor was dated, you know, or do we accept that about someone because we're none of us perfect, and we've all got skeletons or sides of ourselves or mistakes or all of that as part of who we are, and we learn from that. But I'm very excited to show this piece, and I hope to share more soon. I think the dog is okay. Take care, be well, stay dry and warm, and I will talk to you all soon. Bye.